We interrupt this program to bring you the Design Hustle Podcast, conversations around successful design journeys. Take it away, Ali.
I just got done speaking with Daniel Orbach, the Executive Design Director for JP Morgan Chase, and he's worked in companies like McKinsey as a design director and Frog as an intern way back in the day. Our conversation sort of started from discussing Daniel's background, and then he started dropping truth bombs about navigating the design career and the difference between working for a consultancy like McKinsey and working for, let's say, mainstream company like a bank. And Daniel opened my eyes to this wonderful idea of mentorship versus sponsorship and how consultancies have created a way to elevate their talent. I had a lot of fun talking to Daniel and I learned a lot. But this is what he had to say. Daniel Orbach, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's the design community is huge, but also very small at the same time, right? And it's always great to be able to give back or like share your story with people so that they can understand how to get where they're trying to go. You know, it's all about pattern recognition and understanding that I think can really help people. So excited to be here and sort of talk through it.
That's great. So before we started, I asked you about the name pronunciation. So you want to sort of like maybe tell us where the name comes from, maybe your background, something about yourself?
Sure. Oh man. Okay. My family's a little bit crazy, so I'll try to keep it simple. So I'm a first generation American. I'm the first person in my family to go to like a 4-year university after school. Both my parents moved from Israel to the United States in the like mid 80s. And my family on my dad's side left Europe to escape the Holocaust, and they lived in Austria. So that my last name, which in Hebrew means the light within you, is actually a German Austrian surname. And then my mom's family has actually lived in Jerusalem for over 150 years. So like that happened, and then they came here, and I grew up in Chicago on the north shore of Chicago, the north suburbs. And like if you've ever seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off or The Breakfast Club or like any of those movies from the 80s, like that's where I grew up. It was a really great place to grow up, but no one was a designer there. Like everyone, it was like a pretty affluent, wealthy area. So a lot of my friends, their parents were lawyers or doctors or accountants. And I actually didn't really get exposed to design until it was almost too late. You know, like when you go to design school or, I know you have a background in architecture, you need to submit a portfolio to go to school. And most people who submit a portfolio start doing work in the arts early on, and they have like years of experience. I had never drawn anything in my life. When I decided I want to be a designer, I learned, okay, these people who do this, they get to just like make stuff better than it was before. That sounds really appealing to me. Like I want to do that. And I managed to find a program that didn't require a portfolio to get in. They taught you how to draw like when you got there. The whole first year was just foundations.
That's amazing. So was there like an interview process? Did they ask you about your motivations and so forth? Or?
Yeah, so the admissions process in the States is like, it's your transcript, so your grades, and then you take a standardized test. And the school that I went to, which was in Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati, their philosophy was, if you're smart and you do good in school, we can teach you the rest. So bring your brain, show up, and like we're gonna kick your butt a little bit, but like you'll learn to draw, you'll learn how like color, you'll learn form, space, everything. It's like a very Bauhaus curriculum. And I'm very lucky that I found that program, because if I hadn't, there's no way that I would be where I am now.
And so just to have an idea, so which year are we talking about here? So
Sure. So I graduated high school in like 08, 09, graduated college 2014. So it was a 5-year program. The first year was just like, I remember the homework I had the first day was draw 100 lines, 100 straight lines. None of them were straight. And do a self-portrait of yourself. So that you could compare, like at the end of the year, the self-portrait on day one and the self-portrait the very last day. And yeah, it was like that was the era of it. Those years, it was the studio environment very well. I'm sure, right? It's that
Mhm.
that magic.
Yeah, yeah. So I just want to understand, like, so you got into design because there was nothing better to do, or other things were more difficult? Was it something that you felt creativity wise? Because you just mentioned very nonchalantly right now that, oh, I have a music setup. So I'm guessing you play music as well, or you compose and stuff. So
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting that you're bringing that up. Okay, so it's a few things. I would say it's like three things sort of floating around in the soup of like how I made this decision. So I grew up playing classical music in like orchestras and bands. It was very intense. I would play like 5, 6 hours a day, and that continued while I was in college. So I was doing both for a while. Um, but then you realize at a certain point, like, okay, maybe I don't want to like teach music lessons to high schoolers my whole life, because you're not only the top people can actually make a decent living doing, playing music professionally, especially classical. So, okay, I really liked math and science. I thought I was going to be an engineer. And honestly, I like didn't really know about architecture in the same way I knew about design. If I had, I probably would have chosen to do architecture. But I took an engineering course in high school, and they showed us the IDEO shopping cart video. Do you know about this video?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's like for those who don't know, a very famous video now in hindsight, where the designers from IDEO got on a news program and basically showed how they redesigned a shopping cart start to finish. And I saw that and I was like, holy shit, that's it. I need to do that. And I had no idea what it was called. I had no idea what it took to do it, but I was like, I want to do that. Because I think the things that frustrated me growing up was, it's like, how is it possible that we send people to space, but I don't know how to use a microwave? Or like, how is it possible that, people with disabilities still have trouble getting around, or like that we're not able to create things that make it as easy for them to use the built environment as for us? So, okay, I could go solve those problems. That was really exciting to me, right? And then the third piece, which I didn't connect the dots on until much later, was that my dad is actually a really talented machinist and like really good at building things with his hands. And I inherited that proclivity myself. So my whole life I had been like building things, taking them apart, putting them back together, but I never really connected the dots between like that instinct and design until I was already in school and doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really, really interesting. So, like you mentioned about this whole idea of designers and the ability to really look into pattern recognition, because everything else is mostly to do with, like, okay, you sort of understand because we already have the data that comes in, and then it's all about connecting the dots and understanding, like, maybe based on the information that I have, maybe this A or B or C, these three different directions, maybe this is something that I can pursue. But that sort of happens, I'm guessing, once you get the confidence in your own skills and abilities and some reflection upon maybe changing 2 or 3 companies. That is the point where you sort of sit and decide and say, like, okay, I think I've sort of, I have some skills and I have the confidence to apply to get into certain roles and positions. And now I'm sort of coming into your professional life. So, but I see some really, really interesting companies on your portfolio, right? So, in your portfolio. So, starting off with Frog as an interaction designer intern. How does that happen? What happened there?
Yeah. It's amazing how much of that stuff is like not in your control, as it were. The way that internship happened was like sort of, so that Frog said, so the program I was in Cincinnati, you did rotation. So you spent a semester in the studio and then you did a semester working at a company. So I worked for a bunch of companies, and the last one I worked for before I graduated was Frog. And Frog said to the school, just like, give us all your portfolios. So they took like 50 portfolios and they looked through them and they picked mine and they picked my friend Adrian's. Adrian is now a UX designer at Zillow. And we interviewed with them and they said, okay, come over to Seattle. So we flew to Seattle and we worked there. And when I was at Frog, it was, Frog, the culture there was they're very well known for having a distinct corporate culture, right? Mm-hmm. Like every studio had bread and peanut butter in it because Hartmut Esslinger loves bread and peanut butter. And like the Wi-Fi password was the name of this frog, Fridolin, like all these things. And I had no idea what I was getting into. Like I had no idea the network of people that existed at this company and like the fact that I would run into them at the rest of my career. But that like they basically interviewed us or like chose the portfolios cold, interviewed us and gave us the job. And while I was there, I got to work on the inside, like the interior interaction system for Acura's cars that came out in like 20 and ended up coming out in like 2018. So they've been on for a few years. And that was a really cool experience, getting to work with a bunch of really talented people who've like written books on like interaction topics and computer science topics were like in my stand-ups. It was insane.
That is awesome. And so what happened after? So you joined different companies. So I'm just going to jump into Moment. So you joined Moment, and then that's a long stretch of time that you spent there, and then Moment disappeared, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Yeah. So there's an interesting story in between Frog and Moment, and it's like the reason I want to tell this story is because it's at the time was like a horrible thing, but looking back on it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and it's a really good example, I think, of why it's important to know what you value and live your values. So when I was at Frog, I interviewed for a full-time job at IBM. And this was in the era when IBM was hiring, they wanted to hire like 3,000 or 4,000 designers in like a couple of years, like some insane number, right? So they were bringing people in and interviewing them in batches. So I was in a batch of like with 20 other kids. And we're all like in the portfolio review, like everyone sees everyone else's portfolio. Everyone sees everyone's design challenge. It was like sort of Hunger Gamesy, if I'm honest. But like in the seat where I am now, very obvious why they did that. Like you just operationally cannot hire that many people with a traditional interview process. They had to reinvent it, right? So the design challenge they gave us was redesign the homepage for United Airlines. Okay, fine. We all do it. We get to the moment where we're unveiling our design challenges to each other. And one of the candidates in my batch plagiarized his design challenge. She like went on Behance and he looked at one of the things and he just copied it. And everyone knew immediately that he had plagiarized his challenge. And I sort of thought to myself, like, I have to say something. I have to tell them that he plagiarized, because if they hire him and they hire someone who plagiarized their work, like that is a risk. That sucks. Like I wouldn't want to hire someone who plagiarized their work. So after the interview, I sent the recruiter an email and I said, listen, this guy, I'm like, think he plagiarized his work. Here's the thing he copied. Here's the challenge. Like, make up your own mind. And I ended up not getting the job. And when they told me why I didn't get the job, I like asked, they said like, oh, we just don't think your personality is the right fit for IBM. So I was like really upset, because I would have been the first person to get a job or whatever. Like now I know that doesn't mean anything, but at the time it did a lot to me, right? And I look back on that moment and I'm like, I'm no regrets, because that opened the door to go to Moment. And it opened the door for me to go do what I'm doing now. If I had gone to work at IBM, no chance I'd be where I am now. I'd be doing something completely different, right? So in those moments, I think, where you have an opportunity to live your values, just doing it, it was a good reminder that it's always good to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. I think you touched upon a very, very important, I would say, topic, which is principles. Having some sort of principles behind, not even just design principles, even principles of operation, how you look at life, what you think about, and it's and having then the courage or the gumption to go ahead and follow through, which is the most difficult part. Because if courage is one of the principles that you follow, then it's a little easier. But courage is really difficult, right? And especially in these moments where anything that you say can turn against you, and luckily for you, it turned out pretty okay because
Yeah.
you ended up in McKinsey. So okay, so now full disclosure. So what I've really been interested in McKinsey's and BCG's, and so I feel like there's a cult, and the cult of consultancy is really interesting. So this idea of external intervention, and I really find that really fascinating, where these external consultants come in, they understand what the problem is, and then they try to have, have some solutions or report about it, or to optimize or to change or to maybe propose something new, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about McKinsey, and you spoke about a rigid structure in Frog, and I'm really shocked because you spent 5 years in McKinsey, right? If I'm not mistaken. So.
Yeah. A little over 5. I mean, that was also kind of a fluke, right? Like McKinsey so when I was at Moment, McKinsey and Moment collaborated on a project, and I wasn't on that team, but I heard all this stuff like, oh, they work like crazy hours, and like the funny thing at the time was like, oh, they can just like ship a printer anywhere in the world so they can like create PowerPoints. And I was like so impressed by that, and I was like, okay, nice to know the company exists, whatever. And when I was looking for the next opportunity after leaving Moment, which ended up being Grand Studio in Chicago, I just applied to work there on the website, which is, when you tell that to people who like are in the consulting world, they think that's absolutely insane, because the way consulting recruiting works is they go to your university and they have sessions and they like want you. It's almost like pledging to a fraternity or sorority, right? Like they interview you. It's very intensive. There are what's called case interviews, where they present you with like some problem and you have to solve it in real time in the room and like think through how you're solving it, all these things. I skipped all that. I like applied on the website. I did an interview in New York, an all-day interview, and by the end of the day, they offered me the job. At the time, the policy was you come in, you do a morning of interviews, you go get lunch, we talk about if we like you or not. If we like you, you come back for the afternoon, you do 2 or 3 more interviews, and you interview with a partner, who is Jennifer Killian. And if Jennifer and everyone likes you, we'll offer you a job by the end of the day. So that's what happened. Another sort of like insane thing that happened was they issued me an American Express card for travel and expenses for the day. So I got an American Express card in the mail, I used it, and then immediately cut it up into pieces. It was like crazy. So that was one of the first signs that I was like doing something not quite normal, when you like get a credit card to use for 24 hours. So yeah,
it almost sounds, sorry to jump in, it almost sounds illegal, you know what I mean? It's just swiping it and just cutting it into 2.
Yeah, that's right.
Job.
Yeah, like there's some like violation of a social contract there that makes you like
absolutely
think about what you're doing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, culturally, listen, when I worked at McKinsey, it was undergoing this massive transformation from like super private, secretive place to something that's a lot more open. Like the firm McKinsey recently just had their first ever media day, which when I joined was like unthinkable, right? And the firm also, McKinsey, like doubled in size when I was there, grew massively. So it was an era of intensive change, culturally, organizationally, professionally, and also went through COVID, and all of the changes that happened there. I think the biggest misconception that people have about consulting is that it's a monolith. Like people talk about McKinsey like it's a one firm. It's actually the exact opposite. The partnership model that McKinsey has means that it actually functions more like a network of small businesses that are all professionally interrelated or legally affiliated with one another. So depending on the industry that you serve or the practice that you're affiliated with or the work that you do, the partners you collaborate with, you can have a completely different set of experiences. Like, it's a bit like, yes, culturally, yes, methodologically, there are a lot of similarities, but the way that the team feels day to day actually changes quite a bit depending on your personal sort of experience.
So, question on one thing. So, because I've worked in BCG, so I'm sort of familiar with how these let's say the big three, they work. They're pretty similar in terms of the partnership model. Where or in other words, if you've got a good boss, then you've got a good thing going, right? So
That's right.
And it could really be very different when you change teams or projects and so forth.
Super. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a company like that, right? You joined as a designer. So what were you doing? Like, so were you part of, let's say, were you working on client projects where they were maybe looking at different apps or different ideas, and you were creating MVPs, validating them, their ideas, and so forth? So
yeah. So you're right that there's like an internal design function, right, and an external client facing function. I was in the client facing function, and I would say that those are two pretty different feeling jobs in terms of like your day to day and the expectations and all of those things. The being on the client side, there was a huge variety of the ways that you practice design. Like, I was a part of 40 or 50 person teams. I was also a part of 3 or 4 person teams. I'd worked in a bunch of different industries: energy, finance, the federal government, state government, like a bunch of different applications, and also did a variety of different things like concept sprints, actually builds, just research and insights work. It was a huge variety. I think the main way or the main value that design brought to the table was the ability to think about problem solving in a different way, right? So the traditional consulting model of problem solving is very top down, where you use like external sources of data or previous engagements with other similar clients or benchmarks to say like, listen, you're here, top quartile's here. These are the 3 levers we think you need to pull to get there. This is how hard we think you should pull them operationally. That looks like this roadmap. And then you would spend the next 8 to 10 weeks filling and fleshing all of that out. So you actually start with the answer and you work backwards, right? But in design, is like instead of top down, it's bottom up, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, like, we are going to like understand what's out there. We're going to do some observation. We're going to talk to customers, and then we'll understand what the problem actually is. Like, you have goals, sure, but like, what's the problem we're solving? Okay. And oftentimes those things were different from one another, right? So to be able to come in and say, okay, let's reframe the problem. Here's what that solution could look like. Let's test and validate it. And here's how it could connect to the business is a very complementary way of approaching the work. So if a company comes to you and says, hey, we want to offer a credit card, and they're not a bank, but they want to like get into financial services, like, okay, let's talk to their customers about like what that could look like in the store or online. What's the value proposition? How does that connect to what you're doing as a business? And then on the other side, okay, what's the P&L to stand that up? What sort of investment do you need over the first 1, 3, 5 years? When do you expect to go from, investment mode to actually seeing returns on those investments? And what does that require? Like, those things are all complementary to one another.
So did you have a seat on the table when it came to those decisions? Or were you mostly reacting to, let's say, the briefs given to you by, let's say, your the line manager, or I don't know what the hierarchy was, but if you were the part of the design team, maybe the business side was sort of dictating what they wanted based on the discussions they were having with the clients and the data that was coming in.
I would say that it was a little bit more integrated than that. Like, the team was one team. But on the team, like, I worked on a team once where it was the engagement manager, that person I would say is responsible for the answer that the team delivers, right? So you have the engagement manager, and then it was like me a couple of nuclear engineers, a software developer, and a product person.
Awesome.
You know, and so it's like like everyone is working on things that are naturally aligned to their skills, but everyone looks at everyone's work. Mm-hmm. So they were looking at the designs that I was putting together and giving me feedback and thinking about how things could be better. I was looking at process engineering diagrams and helping them think through those things. So it's a strengths-based approach, but it's not, there's no explicit lines drawn on like where you can and can't contribute. My friend Melinda Belcher calls it like it's a short toes culture where like you don't step on people's toes. A long toes culture, people like get offended when you like are in their stuff. But it was very much everyone contributes to all aspects of the answer in the right way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of how it felt, or how it should feel. I think if you're doing it in the right way.
That's great. So now, more of a fluffy question, this one. So, just imagine that, people who are listening, if they want to basically get into one of these companies, based on the experiences you've had, right? What do they need to do? What do they need to know? What are the steps? Like, if tomorrow I want to do it, what do I do? Like,
so my initial response to that is I don't know that me sharing my experience will help people answer that question, because it's a unique experience, right? And also I think a little bit depressing, not that I am recommending this or that you're asking me to do this, but to say, okay, in order to author your own professional journey, do what this person did. Like you, like whoever is listening to this, like you have your own set of skills, you have your own set of unique life experiences and things that make you great, right? So like step one is figure out what those things are, right? Like what's your story? What are you really good at? What do you want to do? And then I think step two is, at least for if you're trying to get like a more junior design job where portfolios are a really big part of that process, like you have to get good at talking about the work that you've done to get in, right? So those two things, but then I think, and I said this earlier, like a lot of it's out of your control. And so I think accepting that and controlling the things you can control, like your portfolio, like where you choose to apply, like the way you prepare for interviews by like researching the company and their financials and their strategy, like those things. But I think in this age of like AI job applications and recruiters, like it can feel like you're just sending your stuff into the void, and that can be really depressing too, A way around that, I think, is to do exactly what you did. Just like reach out to people on LinkedIn, network with them, get to know them. The amount of LinkedIn requests that I get with no note is staggering. Like from people that I have never met. Yeah. They just start sending me requests and they're like, click. It's like, what? Am I a Pokemon? Are you like trying to collect me? Like, what is that? It just like, if you're reaching out to someone who you want to talk to and you don't know them, like write a couple sentences. Do not do it in ChatGPT. Write them a couple of sentences, right? That it's just like, who are you? What are you trying to get out of the conversation? And like, how, like what the help you need. And most people, I think, will, if they're not too busy, will try to help.
Well, that's great advice, Daniel. But it's still pretty wide, I would say, right? So let's try to narrow it down towards. So there's certain specific roles, for example, right? So, and I'm talking about specifically because I really find your portfolio interesting because it has these, let's say, one of the big threes in it. But what do we need to do in order to get into one of these, right? So is it like, would you recommend just like, look for jobs, apply, but it's a totally different mindset, I'm guessing, when you apply for something like that. So what are the expectations? Okay, maybe we reframe the question where what should we expect when we join something like one of the big threes as a designer?
So, in the same way that we talk about like product market fit when we're designing stuff, I think there's also like talent company fit that you have to assess for. And there's a couple of things that you need to sort of be aware of. The first thing, and probably the most important, is, are the skills that I bring to the table part of the strategy that the company is pursuing in the short term right now? Right? And so like and the reason I say that is like if I'm a zoologist and I really want to work at McKinsey, it's going to be much harder for me to do that than like if I am a computer scientist or if I have an MBA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because McKinsey's not in the business of opening zoos, at least at the moment, right? So saying, hey, these are the skills I have, and McKinsey is hiring people with my skills, they're interested in people with my skills, that's step one. Because if you show up to a place and the company is like not committed to developing the area that you're joining, you're going to have a not great time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I joined McKinsey, they were really staffing up McKinsey Design, and it grew significantly after I arrived, right? Like when I joined Chase, I was on the tail end of that growth, and they had hired like 900 designers in the span of like 2.5 or 3 years. Wow. So I think step one is like figure out where the growth is happening. Who's growing, right? That's like a great signal that it's a good time to like throw your hat in your name in the hat, right? I think the second is, I didn't really understand the culture of the company. I had no idea what I was getting into, right? So it's not like I can say, oh, research the company, like understand the history.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any of that. I think preparedness is a really big part of it. And the things I didn't realize that I was doing, that in hindsight were really valuable, are being able to explain your thought process in real time, being able to justify the decisions that you're making, and being able to connect them to the bigger picture, and also bringing structure to your thinking. Like those are, if we're talking about the big three and like consulting specifically, those things are like, they're huge, right? And when I say structuring your thinking, it's like almost thinking in outlines or thinking in bulleted lists and being able to articulate those as you go through them. That's a really, really critical skill to demonstrate that you're structured and that you're rational. So like if you're talking through a design project, if I'm interviewing you and you're talking through a design project and I start hearing stuff like, well, I really wanted to, or they said they wanted, but I actually wanted, that's a huge red flag, right? It's all about bringing it back to the problem. The problem we're solving was this. We identified that one of the ways to solve that problem was by accomplishing XYZ. And so we created this thing that accomplishes XYZ. And we know that because we tested it, we built it, whatever, right? Like that through line is much different than like, I thought that the user would really enjoy so I felt like I could. That stuff has got to sort of be cut out of the way we talk about the work.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think there's the me part, because it's like almost like we're just means to an end. You know what I mean? So the solution, we're one of the so many different people working towards finding a solution. Yeah. Where I think this whole idea of the superstar designer, which architects have a lot, by the way, so I had to kill my ego.
Yeah.
So I had to go through the unlearning process, really very painful rebirth. All the skin was coming off, and one of those and yeah, then you're just focused on finding or getting the best solution, and then the iterative cycles have become so short now and so fast that things change all the time, right? And the versions keep changing, and so the whole idea of falling in love with what you do has just taken on a totally different meaning altogether, because it's solving a problem. Fall in love with solving the problem, and not just the artifact that you're delivering to solve that problem per se.
Yeah. It's really good advice. I don't know who coined this phrase, but strong beliefs loosely held is like one of my core pillars, right? Like I believe what I believe until I'm presented with evidence to the contrary, and then I change my view, right? Or I evolve my view. Like that combined with a probabilistic approach to thinking, or like a Bayesian approach to thinking, I think those are really, really powerful concepts. Like thinking about how likely something is to happen or not and basing your belief off of that probability versus a more absolute way of thinking, right? The interesting thing about Starchitects, and I'm not, I never like worked as an architect, but of course you become familiar with like the Zaha Hadids and Richard Myers and Bjarke Ingelses of the world. Like a lot of my friends who are architects, I talk to them about their career paths, and it's like, yeah, I started by designing the toilets and the HVAC in the building, and then I like worked my way out. And I think there's something similar to that in the way that my career progressed as well. Like you start with the fundamentals. You start by understanding the fundamentals of the craft, the stuff that you're really working on. In design, that's like proportion, color, space, hierarchy, rhythm. And then you start to apply that stuff in the medium you're working in, whether that's user experience or architecture. And then you start to move beyond that and shape the teams that are doing that work or think about the strategy behind it. But you can't, I find it very difficult to have success skipping steps in that process. And you don't have to necessarily learn the things in order, right? Like plenty of people go into the field without a design degree and have a lot of success. But I think it's difficult. It's much harder to succeed if don't necessarily like have each of those experiences in some way.
No, you're absolutely right. I think you nailed it because someone, I don't know who said that. Well, one of those things I picked up along the way, and there was this guy who said like initially you would just feel like something is right as a designer, like it's like you start using words like it just feels right, and then suddenly there comes a time when you know why it's right, and that absolute moment of clarity when that comes in is when you've actually taken the next step. So it's like this little level of evolution where you now know exactly, you can articulate why something works, and I think that's the part that you're talking about. Maybe it's not very chronological per se, but like you don't know what the steps are, you don't know what everything that you need to know before you need to know something. But as you go through this chaotic journey of discovery and as you said, a lot of it is out of our control as well, right? And we have to deal with the cards that you're dealt with and make the most out of it. But going on to what you do now, right? So, and now I'm talking about titles and progression in terms of the profession, right? So from a designer to, let's say, a lead designer to, let's say, a design director, or so how have you seen that these words change what you do, and how has the titles sort of changed in different companies, and what do they mean in those companies?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a difference in title, in the way that the titles evolve, whether you work in like big tech or work in consulting or work in some other place. But I do think like junior, senior, lead, director is pretty consistent. And then, sometimes you get senior director, sometimes you get principal, sometimes you get whatever. I think the question you asked, or at least the way I heard it, is like what changes between those roles and the way that you practice. And I think that if you're and this is my perspective, but I think if you're junior or a designer, like it's God, the analogy I always use for this is a baseball analogy, but that's such a US centric one, so I'm trying to like put that to the side for a minute. I expect you to do the things that you need to do successfully with guidance, right? If you're a senior designer, I expect you to be a little bit more adaptive and start to like bring or suggest changes, start to develop your own point of view around the work that you're doing, but not necessarily lead it, right? So you're operating successfully and flexibly within the confines of the structure that you have, but you're not defining the structure, right? When you're a lead, the difference is I am starting to expect or look for you to see around the corner. So I need you to, when you're doing something, know what the 2 or 3 things are that we could or should do next and start to develop a recommendation for what those things are, right? And that comes from experience. It comes from pattern recognition. So a lot, like, I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation. Oh, I'm a senior designer comes to me. Oh, I want to be a lead designer. Okay. What makes you think you're ready? Well, I led the project successfully, so I'm a lead designer now. It's like, well, not quite. You actually, what you need to do is get experience leading in a variety of conditions, in a variety of scopes, with a variety of leadership profiles, so that you have the pattern recognition to know how to solve problems once you're in the role, right? So it's about doing it several times. And then, okay, now you have the experience to be a lead, you're a lead, right? The difference between lead and director is you're more orchestrating. So you're saying it's about like setting the team up for success, right? Like who are the people that I have? How do I want to deploy them? What processes do I want to put in place to shape the way that the team functions, and so that the lead can like successfully execute projects? How am I coordinating across my teams, my leads, right? And there are multiple levels to being a director. Like when I joined Chase, I was a director for a line of business with like 1 vice president and a few folks on the team. So it was a team of like 6 or 7. Now in connected banking, it's like a 30, 40 person organization. So even within being a director, there's like levels and layers to the amount of coordination and the altitude at which you operate. But it kind of, like my leader leads a portfolio of people like me who are each leading teams. So her organization is like a couple hundred people, and like she reports to the chief design officer so it's the scale and the altitude change, but I think the principal philosophy of the role, which is like, what are the people problems? What are the process problems? What are the portfolio priorities? And how do I organize against them? Like that's the directorial mindset.
Yeah, that's great. So one question on that. So you think the role of mentorship is important in this? Someone taught you how to do this. Did you follow someone during your time maybe in McKinsey or Chase, JP Morgan? Were there other people that you looked up to and understood like, oh, so this is how the job has to be done? Yeah.
So like, yeah, oh my God, yeah, right? But I would, yes, and you, right? Like, I think mentorship is important, but so is sponsorship. And that's something they actually talks about a lot at McKinsey, like sponsorship, mentorship, the difference between them. A mentor is someone who gives you advice, someone who holds space for you and can like guide you, which is also different from a coach. Mentor is not a coach. A sponsor is a person who actively creates opportunities for you to progress. A mentor does not do that. You need both. You need both. Do not mistake a mentor for a sponsor. A sponsor is a person who comes to you and says, Daniel, I want you to lead this team. I think you can do it. Like, are you up for it? Or I think this project would be really great for you because it'll help you work on your development areas. You need people who will open doors for you on your team, right? You need to cultivate and invest in those relationships. You need to offer value to those people in the same way that they offer value to you, right? You can offer value by performing at a high level, by offering to help them think through their problems. But it's not just one way, right? Mentorship is like, can you help me think through my problems? Can you guide me? Can you give me advice, right? You definitely need both. I think a critical piece of advice I would give is that you should have mentors who are designers and non-designers. So some of my, like the folks who are some of my design mentors, like who I would consider to be like my current leader, Paige Schmucker, Brendan Reynolds, Rachel Mercer, Shannon O'Brien, like these are people who I've worked with for years, right? For years, and who know me very well and who always dispense useful advice. Sponsors are different, I said, right? They open doors for you. So, and they sometimes are the same person, but non-design mentors are people like, I'm in a band, right? And everyone in my band, for the most part, is a senior executive somewhere, which is crazy. But like, I talk to them about the problems that I have, and they're able to give me advice from the lens of a non-designer, right? I have folks I talk to who are product leaders or technology leaders. I'm like, one of my close friends is a leader for the state of Maryland's digital department. She like does all the digital stuff for the state of Maryland. Like I talk to her, I get her advice on problems, but she's not a designer necessarily. So you need both. The diversity of the pool you're drawing from is critically important. And then the sponsorship point. Like find people who are going to open doors for you and like attach yourself to those people.
I did not know about the sponsorship model. I think it's brilliant. Once you sort of have a visual of that, I think it's easier to sort of reach out and to manage expectations as well in companies to keep a lookout for. So a couple of things. How did we not talk about the band that you have quickly? So is it like a commercial band? Is it like a weekend band? What is it like?
Yeah, we're a cover band, and we play, the tagline is like songs you forgot you loved, basically. So we play music that when you hear it, you're like, oh my God, I love that song. I haven't heard it in a long time. It was started as a McKinsey band, and our name was Who Just Joined, which for those of you old enough listening to this is like an old conference call joke. And Zoom, we evolved it in the Zoom era. We're called Model J, and it's, I love it because it's a bunch of people who are extremely busy making time to play music together and get better at something together. And it actually ties into a piece of advice I give a lot, which is like get good at something other than design, you know, like have a passion, have a curiosity, have a hobby outside of the thing you do, because they feed into each other. Right? Like the things I learn in design somehow feed into the way I play music, and the way that we collaborate and play music together feeds into all the other things I do. A lot of the most successful people, or people that I view as successful, who I've read about or learned about, they always had like a bunch of different things going on at the same time. It's never just a monofocus, right? And so I try to practice that in my own life.
I think that's a perfect ending to the conversation that we have. I think we're on time. And thank you so much, Daniel, for giving the time.
Thanks for having me again. And it's a really great thing you're doing, I think.
The Design Hustle Podcast.